Go ahead.
Okay, we entered the village from coming from that direction, and those of us who were in the lead, there was maybe 2 or 3 of us were in the lead, and we crossed this intersection here, and then I entered that house there, and there was a pan of hot, warm milk on the stove, and I couldn't resist it. So I grabbed the pan and just drank all of it down almost in one gulp. It tasted that good. And then after leaving that house, I crossed the street to that house there, and I went up the walkway to the house, and just as I approached the front door, the door opened and out came 2 German soldiers, literally into my arms. But it was fortunate at the time, one of our tanks crossed the intersection here and came down there. So I guess when they hurt the tank and saw the tank, it probably encouraged them to surrender peacefully. But then there was a lieutenant, and I said to him, what shall I do with these prisoners? Because usually there are guys who have made a career out of taking prisoners to the rear, because then they go back there and loaf around for as long as they could before they return to combat. But the lieutenant said, you take them back yourself. So in the meantime, the Germans opened fire with a machine gun coming down from my left here across the intersection. So I had these 2 German prisoners, and I had to tell them to run. We had to run through the machine gun fire, crossing the intersection. And then when we got beyond that, I was hoping they'd stop or slow down, but they didn't. But the roadway was nothing but ice because of the pressure of a 32-ton tank on it. Turned the roadway into ice, and all we had for footwear were these old, cheap, rotten rubber galoshes, and they had no tread to them. And I slipped and went down. My helmet flew off, bounced along the roadway, but I hung onto my rifle, and I gathered my helmet, put my helmet back on, and as soon as I stood up, the 2 prisoners started to run again. And I don't know how far it was, maybe about a quarter of a mile in all. We came to this area where there was a large home, and the place was surrounded with vehicles, a lot of jeeps, which told me that this was battalion headquarters. And there were some guards outside, and I turned the prisoners over to the guards, and then I had to return up here. And by the time I got here, they had finished clearing the place, and there's a building down there. It's a home now, but it was a barn at that time. And we spent the night, and when I say we spent the night in the barn, that's an overstatement, because you always have to pull guard. And if there are only a few guys of you, you might be on 2 hours and off 4 and on 2 again. But we spent the night there, and then the next morning we moved out and continued across country.